What is up? Welcome back to Inner World. It is going to be a big year for this podcast. A lot more episodes, I have a feeling, at least monthly. We're all locked and loaded for several, actually, so I'm excited to be back. We had that badass new intro that you just saw. I think it's one of the coolest videos I've ever made, and I'm really, really excited to be here. Dylan, how you doing, man?
Amazing. And, you know, in light of the big E files getting dropped, I only have one thing to say to everybody. Well.
Yeah, there's a little book back there called The Blackest of All Magic behind you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I just want to touch on before we begin, because Chance and I don't like to get caught up in the geopolitics and the current day stuff because the censorship is just outrageous. And so we have to be very careful what we speak. We took a lot of arrows, almost a decade ago and got censored. That's why you don't see our content promoted regularly. But a lot of this was getting exposed through Spirit World and through our work. If you go to innerversepodcast.com, Chance has had me on like dozens of times. And all of this started with us understanding how corrupt and dark the modern system is. And so when people ask, like, what was the impetus for you going back to the ancient world? Well, we just kept pulling threads. And this is where it took us. And then not only do you see how corrupt the current cult systems running everything are, you see that it's all predicated on lies that were created in the Middle Ages and passed off as ancient history. And that's what we're getting to the bottom of and showing you. And we're not the only ones, but it does feel good to know that when people look back in history on us, we were doing this when it wasn't safe. And I never told you where I lived. I'm going to share with you something. If you can pull that up real quick, just so the audience can see it. I used to live in Brentwood, Los Angeles, and there was a gentleman named Andrew Breitbart who lived pretty close to me. He lived in Westwood, and he dropped dead in my neighborhood. And it was shortly after he exposed a man named Podesta, and he wrote before he died how progressive guru John Podesta isn't household name as world-class underage blank slave op cover upperer defending unspeakable dregs escapes me. And now what you're seeing in the Big E files dropping is that all these people are in on it. And not only that, he represents the Rothschilds and represents David Rockefeller as like a proxy to go on all these meetings as these gentlemen aged and were too old to make these journeys to all these foreign countries. And he's tied to the exact same nation, the nation's intelligence agency that the previous version, Mr. Robert Maxwell, was tied to, who's responsible for publishing your education system, like the encyclopedias and all that stuff, and inserting things in the historical record. And what we've shown ad nauseum is there is a certain side regarding genetics happening in a place that you will only ever find in the historical record as Palestine. And we could pull that up in Greek. I mean, if you learn how to read Greek, you could just see it in every ancient historical record that we depend on. And Chance and I have shown you by citing Eusebius, the father of ecclesiastical history, that Israel was a Phoenician name for Chronos, which is time, the archetype of time measured by the sun, reckoning the year. And the 12 tribes are the 12 signs, the 12 months, just like the 12 apostles, just like the 12 patriarchs of Jacob, just like the 12 knights of the Round Table, just like the 12 imams of Muhammad. And we have shown you this ad nauseum. And Chance has basically reiterated what I suspect. and he says it, and when he says it, it sounds really confident. And the more he talks about it, the more I agree with him, is that these are all contemporaries of each other. They are the same system that was spread out at the same time. And that's why you will not bring forth any documents pertaining to the Gospels prior to the 6th century, as Michaelis wrote. And all of this has been conceded by the systems. And then there's these Christian purists who will say that, yeah, but all of that symbolism is from the Vatican and the Catholic Church, which is different. But what Chance and I show you is that all of this is a product of the mystery schools. And all of our early church fathers were members of those mystery schools coming out of Alexandria, and they admit it. So you don't have any Christian purists. You don't have anything from the 1st century. What you have is Plutarch and Strabo and everybody else who doesn't mention Jesus or Christianity or any of that stuff once in the centuries where it matters. What you have is the Celtic Asus, god of war. So what I'm trying to tell everybody is that all of this stuff that is coming out now has already been exposed, and everyone tried to discredit us and attack us and call us crazy and call us conspiracy theorists or whatever derogatory word you come up with. But the reality is we were right the whole time, pretty much about everything. And we bring the cowbell, and what's good about our work is, unlike most YouTube pundits and people who talk and talk and talk, we, in our show notes, provide citations and sources. So you can see in the historical record where we get everything from. That way, you never look bad by sharing our work. And that's the whole point, is we always want to make sure that whatever we say is accurate. And if we're not sure, we try to preface that we're speculating, or we suspect, or we conclude based on what we're looking at, and so keep that in mind.
Which is exactly what makes us different from every other show out there. I can't think of many that actually check the receipts on the things that they talk about. Most of them are just repeating what they heard podcast bro science from some other show they listened to. A few are just repeating stories that maybe they read an account of or something, but again, never followed up. And then maybe even bigger percentage just pull stuff out of their ass. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well.
What you're saying, though, what you're saying to preface this, we're talking about Moses again today, picking up where we left off. And it's worth repeating probably many more times than just today, that entire area of the world and the conflict that has gone on in the last year or two that's been particularly brutal, all of that is justified, predicated on the historicity of a particular nation and people, and a claim to a particular land that has no chain of custody. Even if it did, it would be immoral, but it doesn't even exist. The chain of custody of ownership doesn't exist. The genealogy doesn't exist. None of it is real. And so you have a bunch of these people coming out in the e-files, and that a lot of them are actually, including the big E himself, are identified with a particular nationality that is also a religion that in all likelihood doesn't go back any further than what we consider Greek antiquity, but that antiquity isn't even as old as what we're told. So it's actually, it's all built on a house of cards. And here we are making an airtight case, the devil's in the details, and we're just going to exhaust those details because A, it's fun and interesting to me, and B, no one else is doing it, and C, why the hell not? Let's go.
Yes, and to your point, a tactic that it seems like they're trying to set legal precedent for, and it's a disingenuous tactic, is this idea of a Semite or Semitic. Now, Muhammad is claimed to be a descendant of Shem, and most people can't even describe what a Semite is. What it actually means is that by being a Semite, you are descended from Shem, one of Noah's sons. just like the British aristocracy claimed to be descendant from the lineage of Japheth. And what we're showing is that there is no Noah. There is no Noah prior to like the Middle Ages. Now, if you pull that search up on Google, they'll say, oh, well, what about Gilgamesh? You mean Gilgamesh, that epic that wasn't discovered till the 19th century? That Gilgamesh? In a language or style of writing that wasn't mentioned prior to the 17th century? That's super easy to duplicate. I'm talking about cuneiform. There is no such thing as Noah other than the useful fabulous story, a fable written by fabulists, people who write fables, which all the Greek writers admittedly were. See Strabo's Apology. And the point of this is when you talk about these subjects, whether you're talking about Islam, whether you're talking about Christianity, Judaism, there's a tendency to be labeled an anti-Semite. But that word, even describing languages allegedly spoken by descendants of Noah's son Shem, wasn't created until the late 1700s, early 1800s by Eichhorn. And it was a disingenuous creation. And the whole thing that we've laid out is to defeat any presumption of people calling you a bigot or a racist or an anti-Semite for trying to address facts. And nobody is above scrutiny. And this tendency to scare people into determining and learning the truth by attacking their character, even if they were a bigoted or hateful person, doesn't change the fact. If somebody's pursuing truth, things need to be addressed. And I certainly, I've gone after my own kind harder than everybody. And me and Chance we come from that, Christian Judeo background, So it's like, and I do have friends that are Muslims that I met like in big cities like Los Angeles on the West Coast. But in terms of where I grew up in New England, it was mostly, my friends are mostly either Christian or Jewish or some form derivative of one of those, So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, we're not racist. We're not bigots. We are probably homophobes, but other than that, let's go.
All right.
Reviewing a little bit of what we talked about last time, we brought legitimate questions to the doctrine that the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament, was written by Moses. The esoteric identifications of Moses beyond the he was a historical man chosen by God story include his status as an initiate or one of several Moseses, which Dylan will expand on. The messianic archetypes he fulfills, which are countless, and his personification of the Nile, that he himself is a personification of the Nile, or in a larger Greek context, Okeanos, the river ocean, and numerous other gods that, in my opinion, are not any different than this Okeanos character. It's just one of those cases of titles and epithets, poetic descriptions being mistaken as names or intentionally obscured to be names and creating a whole bunch of different characters out of one system to confuse the people who look into this that aren't initiated. Plato in Timaeus wrote, "When, on the other hand, the gods purge the earth with a deluge of water, the survivors in your country are herdsmen and shepherds who dwell on the mountains. But those, like you, who live in cities, are carried by the rivers into the sea." So he goes on in this passage to also describe that when there is a fiery apocalypse, that people who live by water, particularly referring to Solon's talking to an Egyptian priest, and the Egyptians survive the fiery cataclysms because they live next to the Nile. So we have right here, Plato's confirming the particular reason why savior gods are associated with or sometimes personified by mountains, rivers, seas, oceans, because depending on which flavor of end of the world that the cycle partakes in a particular moment, that God, essentially, that river, that mountain saves the people from that thing. Moses corresponds to both the sacred river and the mountain in his legend pretty closely. And in the previous episode, we talked about a lot of other saviors, deities, and divinely sanctioned kings. And we didn't even list them all, who as infants found themselves floating in a basket or a box on the ocean or the river. That's the ark. And the new world and its progenitor or savior, or sometimes also the raw materials in the case of a cosmic egg version, can be found in this basket or this ark. The reception of divine law on the mountaintop, the Ten Commandments, which we may or may not get into super deeply, is probably Moses' most famous feat. So you got the basket on the river, you got the Ten Commandments on the mountain. Moses is, and we will prove, he is a character representing the end and beginning of ages. That's what ties him to muses. That's what muses are. And Dylan, you want to get into some of the beginning stuff for you, review and whatnot?
Yes. So it had been so long since I broached this subject that I forgot the precedent. When we were recording last episode, I made the mistake of saying I don't know where the precedent for Moses and that word being signifying an initiate and then the initiation or whatever. And so I included it in here. We don't need to cover it because I want to save time. But the precedent, and it's now in our show notes, it's from Proclus. And it was actually in one of my Spirit World books that I revisited and then saw that. I was like, oh yeah. So no, there was the Moses is like saying the initiates. And
this guy has ladled so much gravy, he doesn't even know.
Yeah, that's why there's benefit in circling back and revisiting previous works that we've done, just because there's so much, not one man can remember it all. But Josephus, and where that comes from that we were talking about specifically, was Josephus, who is lauded as the oldest Jewish historian, despite there being no historians in Judea from the time he's alleged to have existed. He also writes in Greek. And the reason this is significant is because were these stories older than claimed, the Greeks would have hijacked them and reimagined them as legendary Greek kings and gods, as they did with the rest of the Mediterranean through a process called Greek mythological imperialism. Yet, on the contrary, the earliest Greek account of Moses is from Longinus at the end of the 3rd century AD. And that's if you believe it's accurately dated in an authentic work. So where'd we expect to see Greek mythological imperialism, as we do with the Etruscan culture, or Etruscan culture as I like to call them? We see the process reversed, such as Moses or the Moseses, as Josephus wrote, being based off the Muses, or in another example, Noah being based on Deucalion. And the problem with Deucalion is he doesn't show up until the 2nd century AD either, but is talked about as an ancient character. So Moses and Jesus seem to also be fashioned after Bacchus and Dionysius, or Dionysus. And
I have a ton of evidence around that.
Perfect. And we'll get into it whenever you want. You just let me know. But to cap it off, they're the same deity signifying the sun. And that would indicate what Chance has said this whole time, that the Old and New Testaments are contemporaries of each other, both based on the older mythological systems and used in different parts of the world under the same priestly ruling class. And this is an example of a system coming after the implementation of the church in a post-Etruscan, post-Roman world. In the work attributed to Josephus, which is written in Greek, not Hebrew or Chaldean, which people call Aramaic now, the slip-up of writing the Moseses as the Muses gives away the original framework that this story was born from. And so
let's reiterate that real quick.
Yeah,
it's not something we can prove definitively, but as you go through our work, review old stuff we've done, listen to this episode, keep in mind the possibility that the Old and New Testaments came from the same time and were deployed in different parts of the world for different peoples. Because the more you look at this, and with the keys of discernment, with the pattern recognition, you see that it's the same thing, that it's the exact same. Like Judaism and Christianity are literally the same. It's not like one came from the other. It's like they are weird, shadowy mirror reflections of each other, rather than a lineage that one breeds with the other. You know what I mean? I just feel like that's worth
No,
repeating.
that's why I'm saying, like, you're really, this is, if there's one person I would elect to convey that, it's you. You're really good at articulating that idea. And as somebody who reads all these ancient documents and looks at the archaeological record every day, that's what I do. And people on my Substack know that there is no Noah in the ark in the ancient world. There's only Janus or Janus in the prow of the ship. And I would like for you, if it's possible, to bring up that coin image of, it's from Sicily.
Here it is.
That's what you find before the Common Era. Janus, archetype of the year. The old man looks back on the previous year, the old year, and the young man looks forward to the new year. It's why January reckons the year. And there's something that needs to be addressed with the uninitiated, who always talk about, why does the year start in the dead of winter or in winter? It's not about the seasons. It's not about the life. It's about measuring the angle of elevation to the sun. And at its low point is the winter solstice. So thus, that would reckon the new year. If you were to reckon the year at the equinoxes, which you can do, the calendar of Martius still does that. But the problem that begets is, if you're navigating around the world in a place that doesn't have seasons, then you might not know for an extended period of time whether you're reckoning spring or autumn when you get closer to the equator. So you would have to wait longer to make sure. And by knowing it's at the bottom of its cycle, of its declination, the Tropic of Capricorn, etc., you know exactly what time of year it is, exactly where, and you can navigate from there just as easily. So that's the whole point of it. That's why it's reckoned in winter, not in springtime.
I'm just going to have you keep going through this because you have more coins.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, what I have to begin is, and kind of the overall trajectory of my notes is to go through the particular major beats, major points of the Moses story. And the first couple I'm going to look at really through astrotheology. And then after that, we'll be getting into some other ways to analyze it. But, I think that I'll be covering things more from a narrative, comparative situation. And you've got just the ancient history artifacts on deck. This is going to be good. So I'll just have you go for a while, and I'll let you know when we're going to switch.
Yeah.
And I'll keep your images queued up. So just tell me, when you want to see the next one.
Perfect. And we're not going to get bogged down in the details, Chance. That's what my notes are for. The point is, I just want to show people where this enters the record and the implications. So if you want to bring up the first illustrated one, I found this, and it's all linked in my show notes for people who want to follow this up. This is from a book in the 1600s, and it's the coin of Philip the Arab, who was emperor from allegedly 244 to 49 AD. And the reason we wanted to bring that up is you can see what all the letters and stuff means. But Jacob, at the bottom of the reverse side of the coin, you'll see the four figures, two of which are in an arc. And you'll see in the arc, it reads Nu Omicron Epsilon, which is in Greek, Noah, signifying rest. You'll also see above them the two birds. Now, some think those are both doves. I suspect one is a dove and one is a raven. And the reason for that is due to the Apollo story. But we don't have to go deep into that. Where I'm just showing you is, this is where it shows up. And this is an illustration in an era before they had photographs, right? At the bottom of that, you'll see two letters to the right after Archi. And Chance can probably read the Archi, right? It looks like APXI, but that's ARCHI. You'll see AP, and then on the bottom, AMEON, Apameon. Now, Jacob Bryant, who's an incredible historian from the 1700s, he believes that signifies ark, and he proves it through the citations, and that's what we've been going over in my Substack. Now, people might be like, oh, that's just an illustration. It doesn't mean anything. If you could pull up the next picture, that's an actual version of the coin. You have to get really, you don't have to now, but like for those who scrutinize it, you have to get really close up to see how it's faded and worn. If you could just, there's others that you can verify that that's what it said though. And if you could just pull up the next one, we'll show you as well. And right under there, you'll see, I
Hard to
put a
see,
little
but
graphic.
it is there.
Yep. And you'll also see right there, apameon. And so what you'll see in those figures are there's 4 figures, 2 in the ark, 2 standing. That looks to me like the same astrotheology which we cover, which is the 4 portions of the year, the 4 seasons. Chance might disagree with me, but I go deep into the show notes, but the reality is that all of this is entering the physical world in the common era.
Can I make a comment too
That's your
on
thing.
this word apameon? I've never seen it before, but appa is a way of saying father. And meon is an ancient philosophical term that refers to the unformed being or pure potency, pure power, pure potential. So it's the father of, the original power. That's what I read in that word, which is the exact meaning of the ark. It's the entirety of being unformed in a state of pure potential or potency that is then reformed by the Father into the next world. So that's just at a glance. I think there's probably something to that.
And Arche is related to ruler and wisdom and head. And also,
The mind.
Yep, as a ship and a vessel. But there is also precedent that, see how it's square? There's also precedent that it means the temple. And in my Substack, I've been going through this over the last several months, showing people, here's the accounts where an ark literally is a temple. Now, if you could just go back one image to the actual coin that was illustrated, the middle one. And I just wanted to bring something that I noticed that could be much ado about nothing, but at circa like 10 to 11 o'clock on the front side of the coin, you'll see it says, it looks like Latin letters for IOVA. Now in Greek, that would be Yule, right? Like as from Iulus, like Julius. But that A is very suspicious to me. And that might be an encoding of Jehovah, which is tetragrammaton. And if you could just go 2 images down to another Latin coin, because most people say, no, it's clearly a Greek L. That looks like that I'm suggesting is an A. But if you look at old Roman coins, there's plenty of times where you see the A without the bar in between the other 2 bars. So right there you see Salus, you see Justinia, and there is no middle bar. It looks like a Greek L. So I just wanted to put that out there, that also is probably an encode, if I had to guess, for Hova, which is Jove, which is Jupiter, God the Father. The word Jew actually comes from Italy. It means God. And you can see this, we've gone over this ad nauseum. There's no need to revisit it. Eu primus atar. Then primus atar gets truncated to P atar, and you get eu patar. And that Etruscan symbolism then begets the Greek and Latin pater, which then begets the Sanskrit Peter, which is also father, which begets the modern Saint Peter, the foundation of the church, who was called what? Simon Bar Jonah, son of Yonah. What is Yonah? It's the dove. Yonah, Yana, Jan, St. John, January, Janus. All ties back to reckoning the year in astrotheology. And so I just wanted to broach that subject as we get into this. Where would you like to skip to? Do you want to just skip down past all that coin symbolism? Because I don't really want people to get bogged down into that. It's all speculative.
You tell me, man. You got a lot of
Well,
notes.
I'm
I've got a
gonna
lot of
start
notes.
with Jacob. Oh, go ahead.
I did go through the full notes that you had last time we talked about this subject, but I'm sure stuff has been added, and I didn't have a chance to this time. And Dylan hasn't seen my notes, so I'm interested to see how much we support each other, our arguments, which I think there will be a lot of that. But we definitely can skip anything you want. We've got more than enough. I think if we don't skip some stuff, this will end up being three parts. So it's up to you, and people can find your Substack for getting into the nitty gritty with more of the coin symbolism. You just tell me where to go. If you
We
want, I
can
can.
revisit if we have time. We can revisit some stuff, but I
Okay.
want to skip down right beneath the Etruscan mirror. There's a paragraph that says Bryant wrote, and this is from the Analysis of Ancient Mythology. And he wrote, in its volume 2, he wrote, "From what has preceded, the reader will perceive that the history of the deluge was no secret to the Gentile world. They held the memory of it very sacred, and many colonies which went abroad styled themselves Thebians in reference to the ark. Hence, there occur many cities of the name of Theba, not in Egypt only, or Viotia, but in Sicilia, Ionia, Attica, Theotis, Catania, Syria, and Italy. And it was sometimes expressed Theba, a town of which name was in Pontus, and it is called Thebes by Pliny. He mentions a notion which prevailed that the people of this place could not sink in water. They themselves cannot be drowned. We may see in a remote allusion to the name of the place and people and to the history which they had preserved." And one of the things I want to broach this subject is Theba also means ark, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I always like to point out that this goes pretty far east with Tibet, which is an like that's an English version of the name of the country, but at least in the written historical record, a name philologically similar or the same as Tibet goes back to at least the 7th century AD, and that's TBT. That's the same as Thebes. You know, like it's got that Thebes, Tiba. It's the same, and there's mythology of the Ark or a version of the Ark landing on a mountain in Tibet. Like there's a Mount Ararat and everything. So the point is this system existed all over the place, and place names are one of the more arcane ways to decipher through. But guys like Higgins do an extremely good job, and people of that era were able to glean a lot from the place names and how they repeated in different parts of the world. So that's good.
Well, one of the things I wanted to broach about that is, you know how in the Egyptian system, there's the immortal gods, and they're basically an allegory for all the circumpolar constellations that never dip below the horizon. So they're always there. Well, that's what I would ask is it possible that the allegory of the people who could not be drowned or could not sink in water, the people of Thebes, the ark, signifies the circumpolar constellations which never set, thus never dip below the horizon, which, when viewed from the coast or on the deck of a ship, would look like they can never touch or go down into the water. And I would ask, is that merely an astrotheological story, not to be confused as history? And might I add, this is the reason why so many of them are fishermen, because they're going down and fishing into the water. And that's why the prominent fish symbolism is so significant going all the way to Syria.
Yeah. And interestingly, with that allegory, you could say that those circumpolar constellations are also protected from the destruction by fire because the sun doesn't cross them directly or blot them out in the ecliptic. Just spitballing.
And something I also want to broach, because we are commenting on Josephus, which is where a lot of this, the subject matter came from for these episodes. Origen, who also had his work committed to the flame, and I think he was capitally punished. He also claimed that Josephus did not acknowledge Christ. and he died almost a century before Eusebius. And the reason that's important is because later historians and scholars, specifically Bishop Warburton, there was a time where somebody added into Josephus's work like one sentence regarding Jesus to kind of give the work credibility that it came from the first century or second century, whenever it was pretended to be from. And Bishop Warburton called it a rank and stupid forgery, and he suspected it was committed by Eusebius. So that's just something to throw out there, because Philo also never mentions Christ in the flesh or Christ being crucified, and there is nothing to suggest he knew of these creations of the church, yet some try to claim he borrowed from the New Testament when it was the other way around. And we're not going to go over this because it'd be too long, but Dr. Adam Clark listed some of the particular terms and doctrines found in Philo with parallel passages from the New Testament. Chance narrated that book. It's God's Acre for Winds of the Soul. So those who want to support him, go buy that book, audiobook. And
yeah, let me give a context to this too for people that have forgotten or didn't know. Dylan's talking about Philo of Alexandria, whom the father of ecclesiastical history, Eusebius, claims or references or sources as being how he knows that the Alexandrians or the Therapeutae had the Gospels before Jesus. The Christian Gospels are directly the same or a version of these Alexandrian or Egyptian texts.
And regarding that, it's funny how these gentlemen have to comment, because they're not like us where we can just say you're full of, you're pissing on people's legs and telling them it's raining. They have to be very delicate back then, because as you see, some of the people that we cited, like Reverend Robert Taylor, was thrown in jail for blasphemy. He had his life destroyed for addressing these things. But Dr. Clark added, after providing like dozens of instances in Philo's work that prove the scriptures plagiarized him, he wrote, "These testimonies are truly astonishing. And if we allow, as some contend, that Philo was not acquainted either with the disciples of our Lord or the writings of the New Testament, we shall be obliged to grant that there must have been some measure of divine inspiration in that man's mind, who could, in such a variety of cases, write so many words and sentences so exactly corresponding to those of the evangelists and the apostles." And it's kind of a sarcasm.
To say that the divine inspiration is that they were all reading the script of the heavens, that this is the translation of stellar allegory or literal star language in the John McHugh sense. But what is being referred to here in Philo is about 35, and there's probably more, but Dylan lists them all out from his book, 35 references in Philo, mostly pertaining to the Logos and specific language of the Logos being the Son of God, et cetera, and how the verbiage corresponds or is almost identical to language from the New Testament. And it is, I would say, it's probably just a coincidence that all of these are so similar. Just kidding.
Well, that's the thing.
Divinely inspired.
You're right in one sense, but to be more serious on the matter, it's the exact way of writing things. It's the ideas of describing that original inspiration. That's how you know it's one is plagiarizing the other. And you see this even with the evangelists. This was a topic of contention, that it's impossible for all the stories of the Gospels from the evangelists, from St. Luke, St. Mark, St. John, and St. Matthew. They're all containing details, which proves they have to be from the same source, not independently written. And that was a thing of big contention at plagiarism.
Some point.
Yeah, and at some point they had to concede, like, it's an untenable position to claim otherwise. So you want to read the first quote of Taylor now that we're back onto our boy?
Sure. How about we take a minute, because Taylor's going to talk about baptism, and I'm going to get into some of the Moses narrative, and we'll kind of just sprinkle back and forth like that. And let me get these images ready. So I'm going to take some work from a guy named David Warner Matheson. Been on the show a few times. Got some interesting work. Does a good job of examining the star allegories. Just want to talk astrotheology for a little bit because sometimes it feels like we're past that. Like, you know, we're so we're into such deep waters that it's like assumed, but it can be, in my opinion, interesting to look at the specifics of astrotheology. Exodus 2:5. This is Moses' discovery in the water. And this is Romanelli painting the finding of Moses. What's cool about Matheson is he looks at a lot of Renaissance artwork. By the way, that's the era of time where quite a lot of antiquity was invented. So the fact that there's such strong correspondence to supposedly ancient scriptures and ancient mythology to specific constellational artwork and Renaissance paintings and sculptures that represent those particular stories, to me, it shows that they're all coming from the same priesthood or same group of people in the know. But in Exodus 2:5, it does not name the woman who discovered Moses floating on the river in the basket on the Nile. His adopted mother in the Bible is simply called the daughter of Pharaoh. But in the apocryphal book of Jubilees and in the writing of Josephus, both of these sources call her Thermouthis or Thermoutis or Tharmuth or Thermutis. So Dylan's probably getting some, you could also pronounce it Termetis, Termutis. Josephus borrowing again from Egypto-Hellenism as he's giving a name for Pharaoh's daughter that just happens to be the name of Egyptian fertility goddess. And it's a deity depicted as a cobra, interestingly. But in the Greek name here, for the woman, the daughter of Pharaoh who finds Moses, there's therm or term, which is heat or warmth, and metis, wisdom, and cobras, which is this Egyptian fertility goddess. Renenutet is a deity depicted as a cobra. Cobras have associations with, they seek warmth and they're associated with wisdom. But it gets actually better than this because this biblically unnamed divine foster mother is called Maris by Artapanus of Alexandria, an alleged Jewish historian of 2nd to 3rd century BC. Allegedly, because his writings might not have ever existed. That's why I say allegedly. He's mostly known through references made to his work by Eusebius and Clement of Alexandria. Church fathers, they embody the trend of making up ancient precedent for their preferred dogmas. So maybe he didn't exist, but either way, they're saying that this other guy said that Pharaoh's daughter who discovered Moses was named Maris. There's also the 12th century Orthodox patriarch Michael the Syrian. He names her Maris as well. This is, later than Eusebius and Clement, but, the spellings change, but, it's the same name. Savvy listeners are already chuckling or having bells ring in their head because these religious patriarchs, even if they made up their references to this Thermutis or Maris, in their esoteric system, the name is either one is completely appropriate, but especially Maris, Mary, Jesus' mother. It's a watery name. He's being fished out of the water. If it's unfamiliar to you, I would also recommend finding out what the names of Buddha and Hermes' mothers were, just for context, to the system. And then, Dylan, jump in at any time, but I'm guessing you probably didn't know that Eusebius named Pharaoh's daughter Maris.
Well, actually, one of my best friends as a kid, his sister was named Maris. We call her Mare. So yeah, it's a beautiful name. But yeah, mare means sea in Latin. Maria, seas. Marina, pertaining to the seas, right? The Virgo Marina is the Virgin of the Sea. These are all archetypes of, and depending on what level they're used in, but it's Venus, or in pre-Venus, the Greek would be phosphoros, and the Latin counterpart would be Lucifer, and Columbia, which is the dove, which goes back to Yonah and Jonas and John and January and Janus. It's all dove symbolism, which I'm actually in like a 4-part, 5-part, 6-part series on Substack right now. It's all tied into it, and yeah, it's beautiful. And then the other thing, terms is the Etruscan version of Hermes or Thermes. So, what
Right.
came
And
first?
in the further
for
back
debate.
version of the system, it's a hermaphroditic entity, Hermes Aphrodite. So the fact that this mother has a name that sounds like Herm or Term is not bizarre.
And the fish looks to the Pisces constellation, Pisces, right? Which the bishops were called Pisciculi, little fishes. And what was that constellation referred to as? Venus et Cupido, right? Which is Mary and Jesus, the mother and the son. And so it's going back to, you have to have this ability to syncretize it and not get caught up in the cascading keeping things separate, is it does go back to the all father, if you will. It's all one.
Okay, so I'm going to pull up this image here. All right. I apologize. It's not the best image, but I'm taking a picture of a book. There's really nothing online that gives such a nice outline of just the constellations that we want to think about in this stellar tableau. But here we go. We have Star Myths of the World is the name of this book. One of the volumes is about Old Testament mythology. Matheson is attempting to identify the celestial character of Moses and the supporting cast members of Exodus. And I will point out that the whole Maris being the mother is a big point in favor of Moses being a divinity and a savior figure of his particular cycle, not, he's an allegory. He's not a historical figure. That should be obvious, but that's a big point of evidence because he fits all the rest of the archetypes who have a Mary mother. Anyway, we don't need to consider Matheson's interpretations here of Exodus as the perfect interpretation because we're never really going to know what the ancients saw in the stars or constellations. But when we look at it, and this is not Matheson's take, but when we look at his work, it actually puts a lot of credibility to the idea that this is stuff that's potentially as recent as the Renaissance era, because, and then projected backwards into 5th century, 6th century, or earlier by the Renaissance status quo. Think of Flamenco, right? Flamenco does a good job with this. He even demonstrates that the system in Ptolemy's Almagest, which is the supposedly oldest stellar almanac that has the constellations that we know of today, he has proved that it's a product of the Middle Ages, not a product of antiquity, which of all the stuff that Flamenco has attested to, that's the one that's all you need. You don't have to be attached to the rest of Flamenco's work. That one point alone is the kill shot to the idea of antiquity as we know it. So Matheson is heavily referencing the same Robert Taylor work that we're discussing in that series. Can't really talk astrotheology without Taylor in your back pocket. So this is good for understanding how astrotheology works. And even if it's not identical to the ancient priesthood, no big deal. So the biblical Moses, like any mythological character, is not always tied to a single constellation, but blends features from several, sometimes even those that are far apart in the sky. For example, his horned face probably links to Aries the ram, and Moses leads Israel out of Egypt, just as Aries leads the zodiac wheel. Could be something there. He violently rejects the golden bull of Taurus, which is part of the age change aspect of Moses, right? We're going from age of Taurus to age of Aries because procession goes backwards. But Moses is also a serpent wielding character, which evokes Ophiuchus, which is far from Aries over here. So we're just looking at, kind of the parts of the sky that have the most to do with Moses. He goes on, Matheson, to explain that the key to unlocking the celestial Moses for him was provided by Robert Taylor, that key being Moses' identification as a deity of the Nile River and of the concept of water itself. As we see, the arc of the Milky Way here, this river, connects all the way from Ophiuchus to Aries and whereabouts. So there's previous books of Matheson's where he does a great job deftly establishing Oceanus or the Milky Way being correspondent in other myths as well. It's good stuff. Astrotheology can be confusing because if you're trying to linearize everything and make definitive statements like such and such figure is such and such constellation, that's not necessarily how it works. It's more fluid, in my opinion. And in the Matheson outlook, these constellations are like actors playing a role. Two actors can play the same character at different times. Rather than thinking of Moses as literally the Milky Way or Aries or Ophiuchus, it's really so much, in my opinion, it's like this is the text that tells the story of this character. And we don't even need to get hung up on saying this is that guy in the sky, so to speak. It's more like this is where the words are that you put together to form the story, in a sense. You wouldn't say that Gandalf can't be on page 13 in the book The Fellowship of the Rings just because he's really on page 12, right? Like that's how I would consider it. But if we look at Scorpius right here, Scorpio, notice the fanning out on the right side of these. You can see there's these fanned out lines. These are variously interpreted as multiple heads or multiple horns. And they probably relate to, because this is right on the Nile or the Milky Way, the river in the sky, Virgil's description of the Nile as being seven horned. Revelation 22:1, and he shewed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. Matheson writes about this verse, that crystal river described in Revelation 22:1 proceeds from the heavenly realm of the throne of God, the Father, identified with fire, and the Lamb, identified with Aries, who's a fire sign in Western astrology. But then it travels all the way down to the water sign of Scorpio, just as the second person of the Trinity is the one who comes down to our incarnate condition in order to reach out to us, point us back to our true nature. That's the religious dogma. So if we pop over to this painting and this part of the sky, we're looking at how this Renaissance art illustrates the astrotheology based on the way constellations have been traditionally drawn. The consistency is pretty overwhelming. So this is just one example, but like Matheson has found an unbelievable amount of correspondence of Renaissance art, of mythology and Christian iconography to fit like hand in glove with constellational, drawings or how they're meant to look. So painters were in the know about this, I guess, or they were being, their patrons were in the know about this and told them what to paint. Could be. That's maybe not the point. The point is, if we look at this Romanelli painting, the Pharaoh's daughter discovering the infant Messiah, we can see the astral allegory mapped on the constellations around the wide part of the Milky Way and the Great Rift. So Sagittarius, Moses' sister, right here to here. You see how her pose, I think you can see my mouse, right? Sagittarius on the left and the sister on the left, Moses' sister, adopted sister, I guess. Ophiuchus is Pharaoh's daughter, right here and here. And then that's the figure in red here. If you can't see my mouse, I'm not sure. The serpent's head of Ophiuchus in this instance is kind of like the head of the maid peeking out over the shoulder right here to her left. That's Matheson's take. But if you look at Ophiuchus, there's the two parts of the snake, right? And you have two figures kind of popping out to the left and right of Pharaoh's daughter. So it's very similar to the pose that Ophiuchus takes in the sky. The basket or ark could be Corona Australis, the southern crown, or could be Scorpio or Ara, the altar, could be the container. I think Ara is the best fit personally. And that, maybe isn't the most important thing. The important thing is that the figures are in these poses that are similar. Not always the perfect spacing or arrangement when you're trying to make a painting. You can't necessarily make it look exactly like this guy. But the point is it's very similar. And we'll see that with a couple others, as we go forward. There's a myth of Perseus that Matheson refers to where the mother and Perseus are set adrift in the box-like casket. And he covers that really thoroughly in a different volume, but shows how the same region in the sky fits the bill for the same story. And of course, that's no surprise as we covered all the different versions of saviors being in baskets or boxes on the water. So that's just the beginning of a little astrotheology gravy to show these poses. Dylan, you want to take over for a little bit while I prepare the next set of images?
Well, no, I've got a lot to. Don't move beyond them. Go back to that sky one.
Okay.
I've got a lot to this. So, and this is where, where my work pisses off people that would otherwise be on my side on things. Is Ophiuchus the original name of that constellation?
That's beyond my knowledge, is it? Probably not.
Nope. And it's known as the toiler, or like the workman before that, like that pose, it's representative of a workman. So the problem with all of this is, even if it's correct, it's super modern. And the thread we're pulling might actually undo all astronomy of the known world, which is that it might all be a product of the modern era when we get down to the nitty gritty, especially people who harken back to Egypt as the precedent, because the Egyptians were never able to produce an alphabet older than the Coptic, which is observably Greek-based. And that's what the hieroglyphics correspond to, meaning they are Greek-based. And the problem with that is that the earlier Abecedaria that they originally thought was ancient Greek turned out to be Etruscan. And the ancient alphabets, the languages that they still can't translate today, come from Italy. And everything corresponds to that, from the Phoenician to the Pelagic to everything. And you have this idea of Pelagians. Well, what's interesting is you mentioned 7 horns of the Nile. That can correspond to so many things because it starts with the ram. If it's the 7 Asiatic churches, or the 7 summer months, it starts at Aries and goes to Libra. That's 7.
There's the Pleiades, 7 stars, in Taurus.
There's the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. It's interesting. Do you know where the word Pleiades comes from? And it's kind of it's a very bizarre way to call it now based on what it comes from. Do you know what Pleiades means?
I have forgotten.
Pleiades comes from the Greek Pleiades, which is a flock of, guess.
Doves. I knew that. I knew that in the back of my mind.
Yonim, Jonah, Yona, the doves of Apollo.
I just needed the clue.
It goes on. Well, I know. It goes on and on and on. And so it's this reference that you could be talking about several different things. So context around the symbolism is important. And I want you to go back to that square of Pegasus.
So I will add too that Ophiuchus is called such and lined out as such in Almagest, which is where, according to the mainstream, the 88 main constellations comes from. And according to the mainstream, that goes back to antiquity, when Flamenco has proven by modern astronomical data that like where those things line up to the equinoxes and whatnot, based on precession, cannot be any earlier than the Renaissance. So when we see Renaissance paintings that show these mythological scenes in poses that correspond to Almagest era constellations, It is like you're saying, this is all modern or
And
like
I'm not
relatively
saying
modern.
the gentleman's interpretation of that symbolism is incorrect at all. I'm just saying it's a moot point because it's all modern. And this is where the people that don't like my work, it's because they live, and I'm not saying he's one of them. I'm just saying the people that are against me, they live in the modern construct. They can't access anything if it's not in English. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I think he proves without knowing it how modern it is.
And the other thing with the serpent is it's not necessarily a symbol of serpents or anything necessarily like that. If you go back to the ancient world, the serpent is revered because it is the only animal, if you were to ascribe the stars and the cosmos or the mundi or the tevel, the whirl of the zodiac, it's the serpent because its shiny scales move in unison when it moves, just like the sky moves in unison. So, and it's also a symbol of the sun because without that sun, it doesn't reckon the year. You need the sun to reckon the year. And that's why you have the Wajet, or the feathered serpent of Egypt. And you also have Cucuclan or Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, the feathered serpent. So we either have a system that is modern forgery, or these cultures were connected going back to the ancient past, or everything's dated wrong and they're connected, but in an earlier time. I don't know what it is. We're just bringing this all the way to the surface so people can maybe flush it out better, and maybe there'll be more discoveries made about it. But that square is significant because that may very well be the astrotheological symbolism regarding the ark. And that's important. It's an important symbol. And if you would just mind going, if it's possible, just go back to that coin with the people in the square, the box, the chest, right? Where it's storing all the knowledge, where it says
You got
Noah.
to give me a second to cue that one back up.
And if you can, it's not the end of the world, but it's just important that this title of Noah is more a title of rulership, of archon, of wisdom, than it is a historical character, as you see on these coins of emperors with the ark labeled Noah. And the religious person is going to try to say, no, it's because they are emulating the Bible and the scriptures, when you will produce no evidence of those Bibles or scriptures coming before these times where this symbolism is occurring. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. And I might be
I'm just
wrong.
trying.
I'm just trying.
Just
I'm
trying.
trying. Why is everybody? I'm just trying
To
make
hurt
a
me.
point. Yeah, it's
Why
you
don't
know,
they
it's
like me?
it, it it's significant for people who want to have the ability to earnestly look at what we're being taught in the world. And if you can't do that or have the freedom to do that, then what the rulership says goes, and what everybody is forced to say goes. And you're forced to believe one way, and then you just teach those erroneous ways to your offspring, and it's just this cycle. And that's how we get into this situation where we basically have a nation that's built on lies now. And pretty much everything we thought we knew turns out to be based on a lie. And I don't think a lot of people would have gone along with it had they known. But without the freedom of speech, without the freedom of the press, without the things to actually question things, or at least hear the other side, even if it's wrong, then you end up in this spot that we're in now.
So, for the sake of time, I won't be as thorough as my notes might be on this, but we'll look at just a couple of for the narrative sake of the Moses story, elements of Moses' story, right? So he grows up, he's raised as an Egyptian prince, and there's not a lot to account for in the Bible, just like the story of Jesus, actually, with the exception of Luke telling a story of Jesus being 12. Moses skips from infancy to adulthood. That's an interesting similarity. And what we get is the story of Moses slaying an Egyptian in his wrath. And Matheson, he shows how, in just a similar way, we can see this famous Renaissance painting. This is by Sebastiano Ricci. This is, oh wait, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. That's the a different wrath. It's the 7 daughters of Jethro, who may be the Pleiades as well, depending on how we look at it. But okay, so we have Moses in this. He's looking the other way, is what it says in the Bible. It says Moses looked this way and that, right, in this story, and that is very this is very similar to other Greek myths, which just lends to the credibility of this being a Greek fable. That Perseus and Odysseus both have stories where they kill somebody while looking this way and that, or looking the other way. And this probably, very possibly has something to do with the Perseus constellation, where there's the Egyptian guy slain, Andromeda, et cetera, et cetera. So, there's, take that if you will, but it's probably up there in the sky. This is an interesting chapter of the Moses story. Is he leaves Egypt and he flees to a land called Midian. And in Exodus chapter 2, verses 15 and 17, Moses arrives and is said to have sat down by a well. The priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses rose up and saved them and watered their flock. So here we can see another painting of the scene. This is by Sebastiano Ricci. That the poses seem more inspired by constellations than by the very brief description that is given in those 2 verses. There is so much artwork and sculpture of this particular pose. And as you can see, it's pretty bang on, even with like the bent back leg to Hercules constellation right here. And so in this case, maybe it's the 7 stars around Scorpio are the 7 daughters. Not super important to try to get all that perfectly figured out, other than, it's interesting to look at these Renaissance pieces of artwork and how constellational they are, and know that those constellations, as Dylan has pointed out, do not even fit into the framework of being ancient for the most part. But yeah, let's see. What else do I have to say about this? I would say there's a more fun and more interesting astrotheology decode in Celestial Code of Scripture by John McHugh, looking at it through the lens of wordplay. But, this is worth considering. We have so much to talk about, and we're at the point of being around an hour in. So we're going to take a little pause. I mean, we might not actually pause, but there will be a little break between segments maybe. Free people will have to wonder at just how much deeper this rabbit hole goes, because we're barely scratching the surface. It definitely looks like we're lined up to do a part 3 to capture all the Moses. Could be 4. We're just not quick about this.
We're not rushing. We're not rushing.
We're not rushing.
There's no need to. The whole point is to create this archive for people, and then you can look at it and explore it further, so you can see that, we're trying not to be on the surface, but this is very much the surface level, right? A lot of this stuff goes really deep, and we're trying to be thorough, but there's only so much 2 gentlemen can lay down for you in a podcast.
So to preview what I've got, still in my notes, the encounter with the burning bush, I have tons to say about that, particularly relating to some Vedic stuff. And then I have tons to say about Moses being age transition figure and how that pertains to muses. That's going to be really interesting. Then we're going to talk about the 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, and what that can tell us, especially with some particularly specific numerical details in Exodus. That brings us into Higgins's idea of the Nero cycle of 600 years between incarnations of the deity, and what that has to do with cycles. And then I have quite a bit to say about the very clear and numerous parallels of Moses with Bacchus or Dionysus. That all, my stuff alone would easily be the second hour or more. So we'll see if this ends up being a 3-parter or what we can skip. Dylan, what do you got for him still in the notes to come?
Well, we're going to keep going with the the impetus driving us, the framework that's inspiring this is Robert Taylor. So we're going to keep going with his work as well on the other side.
Sounds good. All right. Well, we'll take a little break and we'll be back for our subscribers. Thanks for tuning in, free people. But there's the good stuff waiting for you on the other side of the paywall. I think Substack is the best place to go. Mine or Dylan's will get you the full access to the archive. I've also got a Patreon that'll give it to you, and my YouTube channel membership. So many ways, depending on your favorite platform. See you guys on the other side. Thank you, supporters, and get ready for the real meat on these bones, because we just got started.